Box. The Ultimate Unseen Hand Behind the New World Order. Revised Edition. Table of Contents. 1. The Origins of Misinformation. 1. 2. Who are the real Israelites? 5. 3. England, France and the Holy Grail. 15. 4. Knights Templar. 31. 5. A Sailor Story. 41. 6. In Search of the New Jerusalem, the New World. 45. 7. The Lost French Dauphin. 51. 8. The Bloodline of Kings. Introduction. This book has to be classified as a one-of-a-kind novel. It is a compilation of 4 years of extensive research. The information in it is only my interpretation of what appears to be the truth. Nothing in life has a value or is believable for a person, unless that person allows something to become a truth or value in their life, especially within their experience. Therefore, one must tell you that this is a fiction novel based on information that I have found hidden away in all types of corners, here and there, and where one leads they all follow. It seems that they don't have the intelligence to really be an individual. Most people appear to like it that way. In truth, people are about to be led to the slaughter. The bottom line about this book is that it only has as much truth to it as foe allow it to have. If in doubt, you can also do the research and see for yourself. In 1988, I was in the midst of building my dream house in Florida. For almost 2 years I had been feeling changes that I couldn't explain. The only way to describe them was that it felt like I had something very important to do and that it was urgent that I start doing it right away. Whatever this thing was, the thoughts about it consumed my life. But what was it? I hadn't a clue. I only knew it had to do with knowledge. Knowledge of what, though? I asked many of my patients and friends if they had ever had feelings like that, but none of them had. They told me that I was just getting old. I really didn't like that analogy. Then one day, in September of 1988, while working on my new home, I heard this terrible rumble on the far side of the house. The house was vibrating like an earthquake. I ran to the other side of the house to the only window on that side that just happened to be in the bathroom. There I saw a big bulldozer having a fight with a pretty little pine tree that just did not want to be mowed down. The dozer would push it down and the tree would spring back up. This sight broke my heart for some reason. I really do love the trees and hate to see them removed, but this time this one really had an impact on me. I started crying and beating my fist on the walls, asking, who am I? What am I? What am I doing here? Why is life so rotten, and why do I have to live such a hard life to only die and to feel like I never had any freedom? With tears running down my face I turned to leave the bathroom, and at that time, 10 o'clock a.m. in the morning with the sun to the east, through the French doors on the west side of the house came a blinding light into my face. The next thing I knew my wet face was dry and the tears were gone and I was at peace with everything. I knew that I had to write a book. Me write a book? What a joke. That thought did not leave me alone. I checked the time and it was now 2:30 p.m. Where did the time go? No way I could have been in the bathroom for 4.5 hours walking around in circles. One can't tell you what happened to me that day. I only know that it changed my life and I can never go back to being a sheep again. I am now an island of knowledge. This book is the sum total of my life from that time until now. This book is only a brief version of the knowledge I have acquired since that day in the bathroom. That knowledge was the result of an effort to discover what is really happening in our world today. That day I asked to find the truth out about everything, and I desired to know only the real truth. There is no way to easily sum up this book. I can only tell you that since 1988 I have been led back and forth across this country 4 times to find this information out from people that I should never have known. I know angels are always around me. They have done some really wild things in my life to help me out of tight squeezes. They have guarded and cared for me, that I might live. This is not my imagination. I can feel them and sometimes I can smell them. They have an ULT or a sweet flower smell. There have been whole days that they have stayed with me. Everywhere I went, even in my vehicle and to the store, then back in the vehicle and to the house. One day, we begged the angel that stayed with us all day to appear and talk to us. On that night, a 12-foot being appeared just outside the picture window of my house and my mate lost it and fell over 3 chairs. Almost as a response to our state of shock at its appearance, it vanished, as if it was a hologram. All the so-called authorities out there that think that they really have a grip on who is doing what and who owns and is controlling everything in the world, don't have a clue as to what is really behind things. Everyone goes around blaming the Rothschild for everything, but who is behind the Rothschild? Who are, by the way, all dead now. The last one was supposedly murdered 2 years ago. In this book you will find out who really runs the world, conspiracies and corporations worldwide. You have to go back to the past Genesis to find out about today. You cannot start researching today's information in books and ever expect to find the real root of truth about hidden planetary power control. One half of the information in books out there was created to mislead you. This becomes evident if you start studying books and information about the ones in control and how everything came to be as it is taught of. You have to go back to the beginning in the old federal, state and county records and proceed forward in the records. The 2 paths of information will bypass each other, like 2 passing trains in the night. The information that is out there in public libraries and such will never meet with the other, true information. Consequently, you have all been running around the crust of the pie for decades, and you have never found the meat of the pie. In the fall of 1992, I talked to a man that at one time had actually been a part of and had participated in the organizational meetings for the New World Order. He knew all of their plans. In the past year, this man has become very well known. He has been traveling all of the states spreading the word and blowing the whistle, as he says. His name is Carl Sanders. He had also worked for the industrial defense companies, IBM, TRW, Mellon Institute, and many more. He had for many years been involved with the engineering, design, and development of highly advanced technology. Technology used in the Phoenix projects and later the Montauk project that involved time travel. While this man was speaking to me about these subjects, and when I was able to pick my jaw up off the floor, I did manage to ask him about where their present level of technology is today. He went into great detail to tell me that the stuff that we see on TV and in the movies that we think is fiction is not even close to the reality of where the technology is. My jaw dropped again. I'm thinking about Star Wars and Star Trek now. He also confirmed the government's and the corporate world's involvement with aliens and our deriving technology from them. He said that what we see out here in view is about 75 to 100 years behind what the nebulous they have to use on us. I asked him about all of the information in this book, including railroad ownership of all the odd sections and some even sections of land in this country, and what the government planned to do with it if the leases were not renewed by June 17, 1993 or December 31, 1995, which they have not been as of this update November 10, 1994. He told me that my dates were, in his words, real dates to look out for things to really start happening. He said that the government had purposely not done anything about the true ownership of the lands being held in trust for the operation of the United States military railroad system, and that they had just been letting everything ride, and yes, they did plan to take the land back from whomever might be occupying the land at the conclusion of the leases. That is what this book is, the meat. Get ready to have the meal of your life. Sincerely, Alex Christopher. The Origins of Misinformation. The methods of recording the events of the past for posterity and the edification of future generations have changed over the millennia. Thousands of years ago, knowledge of past events was passed on from generation to generation in the form of stories, related by fathers to sons and to others willing to listen. The origin of the word history comes from that practice of narration, in that each legend so recited would be his story, but the advent of writing changed the method of recital. Historians became relatively passive, relating their story just once, leaving the efforts of learning to the reader. The spoken, or narrated story changed down through the ages and the telling, mutating into far more than the realities of the original exploits of the principal players in the drama, into legends extolling the superhuman characteristics of the heroes of the saga. But also at the same time they would degenerate into nothing more than mere legends. But transcribe his story into writing thereafter cannot be changed, or can it? Aside from the origins of the word which describes the discipline, there is also a related and unwritten law: history has always been written by the winners. Contrary to popular belief, it is neither a legal requirement nor a fact that the winner always writes a true account of history, if the victor is corrupted, or has interests to protect from the public, for example, why the war was created in the first place. He is in a position, being the winner, to make sure that the unsuspecting public never gets to know how. He simply writes and rewrites the history books, or causes the history books to be rewritten, and everyone knows that the history books are correct, aren't they? Wars have been fought down through the millennia, and almost always, when over, the victor always gets to write down the results, where the true accounts of the magnificent exploits of the victorious are applauded and extolled to the world, whatever comprised the world at that time. The comments and observations of the vanquished have been, if not outright destroyed, suppressed, and consigned to a dusty, second-rate status of archives, written by nobodies, thereafter to slowly decompose into the mists of antiquity and, hopefully, never again reach the light of day. The victor is therefore exalted as the one who had right, and inevitably, God as well, on his side, and the vanquished become in posterity, if not criminals, then simply misinformed nonentities who fought for a lost and often evil cause. If anyone should doubt that, then consider how history would be written today, in either Japanese for the U.S. side of the Atlantic and the Pacific, or German for the European and North African theater, should the nasty other side have won the Second World War. What then would become of the British stiff upper lip, old chap, or the American way of life, or any of the other colloquial clichés which are abused in describing this wonderful, current way of life? If the ownership of control of the power and or lands and or ideals, and ideals usually disguised as one of either power or land, or both, have not been decided by the act of war, then such coups have usually been accomplished in other ways. 1. Assassination has always been a good, clean way. Simply kill the incumbent leader. This method has a time-honored history. 2. A more insidious method, but still effective, is the usurping of the authority and power by one or more individuals who, while appearing to be loyal to the master, manage, through one means or another, take away his power. This method can be broken down into several sub-methods. 1. A. Cause the incumbent leader to fall from grace. This most likely in the case of a politician, but, in this instance, make sure you are yourself popular in the public eye, in order to be able to take over, or B. Wait until the king is incapacitated by some debilitating illness and unable to take care of his kingdom, or estate, then surreptitiously take it out from under him, or C. Wait until just after the king dies, even if prematurely, then I. Place the heir on the throne while making sure he has no ability or opportunity to exercise any power until you have exerted enough influence over the inexperienced new monarch to get him to leave everything in your control, then you kill him, or 2. Employ method number 1 against the heirs and descendants of the king. That is, kill the heir, then place someone else, a close relative, perhaps, on the throne. But be sure that the new king is someone who is, A. Popular with the masses, such a member of a family would choose to be in control, and, B. Someone whom you can directly, or indirectly control. And have him appear to be in control, but, in reality, control everything directly yourself. 3. As a side thought, the wars do not have to be wars which involve armies, tanks, ships and aircraft and weapons of mass destruction, unless they are for a major cause. They can also be minor wars or conflicts, or police actions, or peacekeeping efforts of a political or economic nature. Where we are not dealing with the likes of the king or a country, there are other ways which deal, more specifically, with individuals or corporations. But most of the methods adopted against the individual or companies embody, at least in principle, a rough approximation, if not direct copy, of those outlined above. Of course, there are more subtle and ingenious ways to wrest control of assets from others, but there is not enough space in this book to address all the finer details of that particular craft. Only those which pertain to the main subjects and object of this book. This book will address the events relative to the time period from biblical time but, predominantly the 1700s and 1800s, before the American Civil War, and the events of the martial law period of the Civil War, and then the developments after the Civil War martial law period up to the present day and all the hidden secrets that one have been able to uncover and the possible or probable events of the future, and all the intertwining connections. It is the intention of the author to present the real facts pertaining to the true history of the development of the state of affairs that have not only unfolded into the United States of America but how it reaches into the other countries of the world. Many hundreds of books including school textbooks and other fictional or non-fictional books on the history of the United States have been written by many well-renowned and famous historians. And it is not the intent of this author to malign or disparage their efforts in any way. Other writers have attempted to educate the general public with other literary efforts, which, while the authors claim many years of dedicated and diligent research, either failed to conduct such research, or, in the worst cases, relied upon gossip and research of persons who not only had a complete lack of knowledge regarding the subject matter, but had little if any knowledge as to how to properly use a library. It therefore stands to reason that such authors can and could not hope to achieve their claimed elevated status as revelers of the real truth owing to the fallacious nature of their methods of research and inquiry. Still other writers claim to have gleaned their immense knowledge of the subject matter through intimate friends on the inside of corporations and or the activities which form the primary subject matter of their books. While this, on the outside, may offer some means of finding out things otherwise impossible to discover, and even may seem to be the only way to get to the bottom of the problem, it also should be realized that those friends have, not only their own interests, job, and families to protect, but, in some cases, matters of national security, and therefore are not going to give over vital or even truthful information for fear of reprisal or worse. Where the 2. Informant is perhaps an executive of this corporation, even then, contrary to popular belief, executives are not always privy to the real truth, and are often manipulated by the deliberate dissemination of misinformation and, in some matters, kept entirely in the dark by their superiors. While in some circumstance it is necessary to rely on the efforts of some of the true historians of the past in gaining source material for a pending publication, the author also must be very careful in selecting truly relevant historical material, and therefore must adopt several rules regarding his sources, namely, a. If it is necessary to rely on historical authors, choose well-known and respected authors, whose books are well and truly corroborated by other respected historians, or b. While they are an interesting source of information, no newspaper or magazine article can be relied upon for, or regarded as the true version of concrete historic fact. This should be an obvious choice, yet so many disregard it. While some newspaper articles in the more respected newspapers are quite truthful, factual and beyond reproach, it is generally accepted that they are, at best, a dramatic embellishment. The other notable type of article as presented is by the proverbial supermarket tabloid, and can only be described as an entirely fictional account of a non-existent event, such as shown by the headlines, "Man dies in love packed with 47 cows," or "Mink coat comes alive at dance and bites owner to death." Or the ever-popular stories of the latest antics of the Hollywood superstars which are presented by such magazines in such a way as to cause the subject of such pseudo-libel to have little or no Legal recourse, while affording said tabloid the luxury of cashing in on the gossip-hungry people who buy such supermarket newspapers and magazines. And yet some of these above-mentioned less than thorough researchers rely on the likes of these newspaper stories, fictions and gossips as historic fact. Of the more respectable and irrefutable newspaper articles, the majority, such as those written at or about the turn of the 20th century which deal with such subject matter as the persons of the Rockefellers, or J.P. Morgan, the Lehman Brothers, Thomas Edison, Marconi etc., or which trumpet the achievements of the government of the day, as shall be shown in subsequent pages, can only be relied upon to furnish proof of the existence of such people or the government, and to furnish a reasonable assumption that the purported actions of those people did take place, and not as a true and correct record as to what those people or governments did or why or when they did it. In both corporate and government circles, the news is nothing more than the information those particular leaders wish to be made public at that time. In short, propaganda. If you, the reader, should doubt that statement, consider the way that the media has been used to document the actions of the government since the American-Korean War. The Korean police action, and every other war or conflict since then. How many of the true facts emerged into the realms of the general public? A true and correct account of history cannot be achieved by viewing today's result of prior actions, and then attempting to deduce what possible singular action it was which achieved that particular result. Although this may be relatively accurate for the short term, it becomes hopelessly inaccurate in the long term. I might view a building and, from its form, function, architecture and design, and who visits years. One might delve a little deeper into the mystery and all. I might view a building and, from its form, function, architecture and design, and who visits it and why. I might deduce that it is a McDonald's, hamburger business, built around 5 years ago, obviously a thriving business in the area and doing well after 5 years. One might delve a little deeper into the mystery and also consult with a local individual and find out that it is actually a franchise which is 5 years old, but that the headquarters of the company, that is the parent company, is about 20 years old, that in the M of the Golden Arches obviously is the scriptic design of the M of McDonald's. But go to the intersection of Lakewood and Florence Boulevard in Downey, 90,241, in California and view the 1950s style structure which is one of the surviving buildings of the original chain started in San Bernardino in California, and you will see in the building's design where the famous Golden Arches came from. For a true history of the formation and development of the United States of America, and the so-called American Industrial Revolution, there are several areas in which to research which offer a wealth of information. The following are just a few. 3. 1. Congressional records, Library of Congress, and official historical societies. 2. Law libraries and the libraries of various universities which are recognized as being among the best in teaching law and its practice. Family record, of those families involved from the beginning in the areas of interest. All of the above are extremely useful in finding the bones of the truth, but the meat of the proof must be found elsewhere. There is one area which is available to all, and all can view it at any time. The information sought in this area is, when acquired, legally admissible into any court in the land, as against, for example, library records, which do not constitute legally admissible evidence. In order to tap into this wealth of knowledge and proof, the researcher must have at least a better than rudimentary knowledge of the subject matter, acquired through the use of all the research areas mentioned in clauses 1 to 5 above, and an ability to ferret out the real historical facts from the fictional propaganda. The sequence of research, in the case of the famous McDonald's, in order to find out exactly when and where the company was formed, is to go first to the head office to ask when and where. Then, to make sure, go to the county courthouse of the particular state and county, and research the books of corporations and find the actual document of incorporation which must, by law, be filed in that courthouse. If you cannot then find it, there are 4 possibilities. A. They were mistaken, or worse, at head office. B. The documentation for McDonald's is not in the index, either intentionally or inadvertently omitted. C. The corporation is not sealed McDonald's at all, but another name, in which case go back to the head office. Or D. The records have been removed, either by authority or stolen, or destroyed, or both. Then to find out what they did, look at the books of deeds, not just real estate deeds. Every deed or action or event, recorded in that courthouse under the true name of the corporation and in every other county courthouse in which that corporation conducts or conducted its business. Any way you look at it, to get at the real truth and to create an accurate history of what happened, you must get to the bottom of it and go to the courthouse to find the truth. The bones of this book have been created from the sources as outlined in clauses 1 through 5 above. Where and when possible, and more particularly concerning the time period encompassing the early development of the United States of America to the present day. The meat on those bones has been provided from the real historic archives of the United States of America, namely the county and municipal courthouses and other similarly oriented depositories which present the legally admissible documentary proof of the main objective of this book, which is, simply stated, that this is chiefly an attempt to try to set the record of history straight, by showing you, the reader, 1. How history has been written by the winners, 2. That history is still, today, being written by the winners, usurpers, 3. That the history which the population has been taught in the schools is not the true history as reflected and proven in the legal record books, 4. That history is, unfortunately, still being repeated, 4. Who are the real Israelites? Although we are supposed to be living in an enlightened world, and in many ways we are, when it comes to understanding who or where the 12 tribes of Israel are in the world today, we find only a limited amount of information, and much of it is conjecture. The following information, along with the migration map, will be helpful in shedding more light and understanding on this most important and timely subject. We are endeavoring to show that the 12 tribes of Israel in the world today are none other than the peoples which comprise the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Germanic, Scandinavian and kindred peoples. Since they are scattered throughout the world, it is difficult to have an accurate estimate of how many Israelites, real Israelites, there are living at this time. But there are some who estimate that there are between 6 and 700 million. The promise which is stated in the scriptures made some 3,800 years ago to Abraham, Isaac and Isaac's sons, the Saxons, as recorded in the book of Genesis, has come to pass. The promise was reiterated specifically to Jacob, who was given the name Israel. The first time that Abraham was told that his progeny would be a blessing to all nations of the world, and would be a great host of people, is found in the 12th chapter of Genesis. But for this study we will consider chapter 22, where the Lord appears the second time to Abraham to repeat and confirm what we call today the Abrahamic covenant. Consider verses 15 through 18, which state, "And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice." For many centuries the peoples which comprise Anglo-Saxondom have practiced some kind of faith to God. They are found in every nation and people in the world, and they have also been a blessing in other ways to the have-not nations of the world. Most Christians are aware that the Israelites were carried into captivity, but many know little about the details. A short synopsis of this story is found in 2 Kings, chapter 18. There we read of this deportation of Israel and, a few years later, most of Judah. In approximately 730 B.C., Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invaded Israel, and we read in verses 11 and 12, "And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Halah and in harbor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant." In verse 13, it states that 7 years later the Assyrian army came up against the remaining cities of Judah and took them. Only Jerusalem remained under King Hezekiah's control. Eventually the city of Jerusalem was also destroyed as the people continued to struggle. In the year 596 B.C., Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came and besieged Jerusalem, and took the inhabitants approximately 22,000 into what we call the Babylonian captivity. This is a short history in a nutshell, so to speak, of Israel's deportation and subsequent captivity. However, the important thing that we need to remember is that, when almost the entire population of all 12 tribes of Israel were taken captive by the armies of Assyria, they were placed in the area of the Caucasus Mountains to the north of their homeland. There they remained for approximately 100 years, and became known as Caucasians. Most of these people had fair skin, blonde, or reddish blonde or light brown hair and light blue or blue-green eyes. The name Caucasian has remained as part of their identity ever since that time. Most people have no idea whatsoever of the connection between the Caucasians and the Israelites of Bible history and prophecy. Refer to the chapter about England, France and the Holy Grail. 5. In fact, the great majority of the peoples of Anglo-Saxondom today have little, if any, idea as to why they happen to be called Caucasians. When a person seeks employment, it is not unusual to find the question asked as to whether they are of Caucasian descent. Most people answer yes without thinking of the historic reason for this designation. Secular history records that the 12 tribes were never really lost, but had just taken on a different name. The map shows the different routes taken by the Israelites when they left the area of the Caucasus Mountains and migrated over into Europe during the subsequent years. They were not known as Israelites during this trek westward, but by the various names as shown on the map. Later, as they settled in various parts of Europe, they took on the names by which we know the countries today. Collectively, we call them the Western Christian nations. As the movement west continued, we find that a representative number of the 12 tribes gathered here on this North American continent. The prophets Isaiah and Micah prophesied that in the last days a great and mighty nation would arise. It would be a prosperous nation, and be called Jacob, i.e., Israel, and this great prosperous nation and its people would honor God. Today, millions of people from other cultures and races are seeking to migrate to America and Canada to have a share in our materia, prosperity. The prophet Hosea prophesies about the future restoration of Israel, which has now been fulfilled for the most part. You need to realize that the Caucasian race, the peoples which comprise Anglo-Saxondom, are the Israelites talked about in the Bible. We are the real Jewish race. The above information is one of the best kept secrets of our time. The people that are in control and are trying to take over the world do not want a certain part of the population of this country and many others to know that they are the chosen people, not the ones that are in old Israel trying to re-establish the home front there. The lost tribes, the chosen people, are found en masse in the United States. They are the light-haired, blue or blue-green-eyed people. In the year of 1992, in a little town above Bonners Ferry, Idaho, there was a family by the name of Weaver that was ripped apart and was used as an example. This family were members of a new group of people that call themselves the New Identity Movement. These people know that they are the true descendants of the seeds of Abraham, but the controlling Jews have taken over our government, and they go nuts when their claimed position is threatened. What the nebulous they did was that they sent in federal troops to make an example of this family. The fact that the root of the whole fiasco was over religious belief was never on the news, to my knowledge. Randy Weaver and his family were very outspoken about their beliefs, and this was their downfall. Randy Weaver lost his wife Vicky and a son in this show of power over the people. The Khazar Jews that are controlling our government have plans and will stop at nothing to wipe out the true seeds of Abraham. They have been in our government for some time now and have written laws to protect themselves, and laws such as the emergency executive orders as outlined in the chapter on FEMA, to force the chosen race into concentration camps and kill them by whatever means they choose. It's the plan for another holy war. Another Inquisition is the one being done from the Catholic Church, because they, Khazar Jews, still control it too. They have been trying to wipe out the royal seed, the chosen ones, for a long time. The Khazar Jews are also behind the Illuminati and all of their dastardly plans to control the world hand in hand with the Catholic Church, the Great Scarlet Whore. Are most Jews descendant of Abraham or the Khazars? The greatest source of pride for Jews is their belief that they are the blood descendants of Abraham. Out of that conviction has come not only identity, but deep confirmation through the ages. The confirmation results from a deliberate restructuring of history. Modern scholars have, however, begun to question whether all who consider themselves Jews are in fact Jews at all. There is mounting evidence that the great majority of Jews today, the Ashkenazim or Eastern European Jews, are not the offspring of Abraham, but descendants of the ancient Central European nation of Khazaria, converted to Judaism in 740 AD. 6. Khazaria's conversion to a Judaism is unquestioned. What remains in doubt is what became of the roughly 2 million Khazarians in the centuries following conversion. Did they dissolve into the nations of Central Europe? Or did they remain relatively intact, migrating to such countries as Poland, Lithuania, and Russia, laying the foundation for the massive Jewish populations Eastern Europe, the source of most Jews living in Russia and the United States today? To begin to unravel this question, we will look at the Khazars in the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, the Jewish Encyclopedia, and the Encyclopedia Britannica. The 13th tribe, the exhaustively researched study of the Khazars by the eminent modern Jewish writer, Arthur Kessler, provides us not only with vital background information, but conclusions about the final destiny of the Khazars, which the encyclopedias omit. Who were the Khazars? Where had they come from? The country of the Khazars, a people of Turkish stock, occupied a strategic key position at the vital gateway between the Black Sea and the Caspian, where the great Eastern powers of the period confronted each other. It acted as a buffer protecting Byzantium against invasions by the barbarian tribesmen of the northern steppes, Bulgars, Magyars, Pechenegs, etc., and later the Vikings and the Russians. Of even more importance, both from the point of view of Byzantine diplomacy and of European history, is the fact that the Khazar armies effectively blocked the Arab avalanche in its most devastating early stages, and thus prevented the Muslim conquest of Eastern Europe. The Khazars, according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, may have been the descendants of Attila the Hun. Like other Turkish peoples, they manifested the strongest warlike traits, yet were often gifted with commercial and artistic genius. At the peak of their prosperity and power, they exacted tribute from no fewer than 30 nations of Central Europe over whom they held undisputed dominion. During the 8th century, Khazaria found itself embarrassed. The other nations surrounding it were adopting the more advanced monotheistic religions of Byzantine Christianity or Islam, while Khazaria languished in the primitive superstitions of a nation of nomads and warriors. It was time for a new religion. In 740 AD, the Khagan summoned representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to his presence, each being provided with the opportunity to state its case. In the end, Judaism was accepted as Khazaria's new religion, probably because it carried no obligation for military alliances, as did Byzantine Christianity and Islam. For over 400 years, well into the 13th century, Judaism thrived as the state religion of several million Khazars. The Khazars, whose most educated guess as to who might be their founding father would have been Attila the Hun, came to believe they were descendants, not of the Golden Horde, but of Abraham. The Khazars studied Hebrew, venerated the Talmud and Torah, yearned for the coming of Messiah, and actually hoped to soon retake Jerusalem from the Muslims and return to the land of their forefathers. The Norsemen, or Rus, forefathers of modern Russians, gradually gained the upper hand while Khazaria declined. The Rus made an alliance with Khazaria's traditional ally Byzantium, and together in 1016 A.D., they treacherously invaded and conquered Khazaria, bringing to an end the autonomy of one of the most powerful and strategic nations of the ancient world. In the following century, the fabric of Khazarian life was further rent by invasions of the Cumans, a wild, barbaric horde from the steppes of Asia. Yet, far worse was the full-scale invasion in 1245 of the terrible Mongol hordes led by Genghis Khan. Before the terror of Genghis Khan, not only the Khazars, but most inhabitants of Central Europe fled to the west. Yet the Khazars, traditionally a nation of nomads, had been migrating west and northwest for centuries even before the earlier invasions of the Rus. By the time of the Mongols, Khazar communities were well established in Hungary and the Ukraine, in the Balkans, southern Russia, in Slavic lands, in Lithuania, but most of all, Poland. With the first awakenings of civilization in Poland beginning with the founding of the First Piast dynasty in 926 A.D., the Khazars, because of their commercial background as artisans, middlemen and traders, were especially welcome as settlers. It was not long before one Polish city contained 5 synagogues, while many towns had at least 2. In fact, complaints began to come before the magistrates that Khazar synagogues, because of their height and opulence, were putting Christian edifices to shame. Legislation was demanded to limit them in size and 7. K. 8. 9. Number. Even as late as the 15th and 16th centuries, Khazars continued to arrive and prosper in Poland, making Poland the new Khazaria to roughly 500,000 displaced Khazars. It was well into the 17th century before the racial isolation of the Khazar communities in Poland. Lithuania and Russia was significantly altered by contact with authentic descendants of Abraham from the West. During the Muslim conquests, and after the Jewish exodus from Babylon in the 11th century, most true Jews had settled in the lands surrounding the Mediterranean, especially Spain. Only relatively small numbers of such Jews inhabited northern Europe. Despite claims by Jewish historians that mass migrations of authentic Jews moved east into Khazar territories as a result of such calamities as the Crusades, the Black Death and the Inquisition, Kessler thoroughly documents the absence of any historic basis for such alleged movements concerning genuine Jewish populations in the German Rhineland before and after the First Crusade. Ultimately, the first widespread contact between Khazars and Jews of the West occurred as a result of the anti-Semitic Chmielnicki massacres in Poland of 1648-49. A wave of Khazar migration began out of Poland to the West, a migration which continued almost 3 centuries until the Second World War. It is out of that migration, beginning midpoint in the 17th century, that the principal Jewish settlements of Europe, the United States and Israel have been formed. Yiddish, the language of Khazars. Curiously, a study of Yiddish, the language of the Polish Khazars, also confirms the absence of authentic Jewry in Poland before the mid-17th century. Yiddish, of course, began as the Jewish lingua franca language of commerce. It combined Hebrew with the East Middle German spoken by the German bourgeoisie class which dominated Polish culture during the period in which Yiddish was formed. The fact of the matter is that if authentic Jews had been in Poland in the time of Yiddish's evolution during and after the 15th century, then words of the West German dialect spoken by Jews of the West would also be found in Yiddish. Yet, according to scholars, Yiddish is untainted by West German influence. In contrast to thousands of Hebrew, East German and Slavic words in Yiddish, there is not a West German word to be found proving that authentic Jews had no part in the cultural life which produced Yiddish. If Jews from the West had been unable to influence Yiddish, which in the period of its formation was a linguistic free-for-all inviting the contributions of anyone, is it credible that they would have made any significant contribution to the gene pool of the Polish Khazars? Hardly. It cannot be denied that from the day Khazaria was converted to Judaism, Jews worldwide had been vaguely aware of a Jewish state to the east, and some may even have visited and intermarried. Yet such infinitesimal commingling of genuine Jewish blood in the veins of hundreds of thousands of Khazars would not have compared to the much more frequent inbreeding which must have inevitably occurred between the Khazars and the Hungarians, Russians and Poles who surrounded them. The cruel hoax. We have the strongest evidence, then, from historic and linguistic sources, that the Ashkenazi Khazarian population of Eastern Europe, the source of most of the people that call themselves Jews but are not, if not 100% Gentile before the mid-17th century, were very near to it. For a very long time now, the elders of this group of so-called Jews have been telling the children to marry into the Gentile people in order to soften or delete the facial features. This has been happening for a very long time in order to infiltrate the Gentile without much notice of what they really are, controlling Khazars at heart. With this in mind, the Jewish claim that all of Eastern Europe contains at least some of the blood of Abraham becomes spurious. The crudest attempt to preserve the Ashkenazim from being as Gentile as the verdict of history decrees them to be. Rejecting history, Khazar Jewish scholars scramble for even the smallest claim to the patrimony of Abraham, since it is essential not only to the self-esteem of Eastern European Jewry, but to legitimize the present Jewish claim to Palestine, a claim which has been most insistently made by those of Khazar origin. The most any Eastern European Jew can claim with confidence is that his forefathers were converted to Judaism out of paganism. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. 10. Yet if this black joke is on the Jews, it is almost as much on American fundamentalists. Most Jewish settlers in Palestine during the first half of this century were Ashkenazim. Yet Christians have defended them as God's chosen people. Hogwash. Whose zeal in expropriating the native Palestinians they viewed as the laudable predestined role of regaining the land promised to their forefathers. The truth is, the majority of these Jews who pioneered Palestine, high-handedly expelling Arabs from their homes, were no more the descendants of Abraham. While Christians have totally accepted the racial and territorial claims of the Ashkenazim, it is intriguing that most of their fellow Israelites, the Sephardic and Oriental Jews, have not. In modern Israel there is a racial memory which persists, a primal resentment of those aggressive, red-haired Jews from the north. In fact, antipathy between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Oriental is so intense that it is an exception if they intermarry. Racial slurs, discrimination, and even violence between them is increasingly common. Nevertheless, both Jews and U.S. evangelicals are reluctant to accept the historic, racial basis from such aversion, preferring to believe all Jews are, by definition, the children of Abraham. What is the spiritual and prophetic significance of the inbreeding of the Khazars into the stem of Judah? Does it threaten the biblical promise of God's ultimate restoration of the Jewish nation? Consider, for example, the Sephardic Jew, the Jew most likely to inherit the actual genes of Abraham. Although we would like to believe he is untainted by Gentile admixture, again, the evidence suggests otherwise. Why is it that Jews living in Holland, Morocco, Italy, or Turkey often resemble the inhabitants of their host country more than Jews living in other parts of the world? It is because, despite rabbinic scriptures, Jews have intermarried with their host nations during the dispersion, just as they did in biblical times. During the past 2,000 years, the beautiful daughters of Rebekah have been seduced or wooed by Gentile men. Jewish boys covet fair-haired, blue-eyed Gentile girls. Today in America 40% of Jewish young men marry outside their race. Is this only a recent phenomena? Of course not. Intermarriage of such magnitude is indeed not unique to our time, but not the fact of intermarriage in Israel an indulgence by peasant or potentate from the beginning. The Zionist explanation. Just as there are two different parts of Christianity, Catholic and Protestant, which have fought bitterly during the history of the world, there are likewise two parts of what is known as Judaism. The Orthodox Jewish religion, and the Zionist Judaism by the politics of race. The Zionist Judaism today is not only made up of Khazars/Jews, but you will also find so-called Christians supporting their cause. Our government, Senate, House of Representative and Presidency is almost 100% Zionist/Khazar controlled. That is why we are having some outrageous Zionist slanted laws pasted by these people that we have put in power with our vote of trust, so they could stab us in the back. This is how some people such as former President Wilson and the Reverend Jerry Falwell could claim to be both Zionists and Christians. That sounds like a warped mind or double jeopardy. What have the Zionists been doing? In April 1917, after being re-elected for a second term on the campaign slogan, "He department us out of war," and after the agreement was made with Britain to set up political Zionist socialist democratic state, Wilson declared war on Germany. George Bush campaigned on the theme, "Read my lips, no new taxes." He did all in his power to get all sorts of new taxes through Congress. In 1939, Admiral Sir Barry Domville, director of British naval intelligence during the pre-World War II era, and some of his associates, concluded that there was sufficient evidence to prove that the leaders of what he called World Jewry, and what we now identify as political Zionism, were the secret power behind the drive for a new world order. They became convinced long before World War II that these Zionists were using their tremendous wealth to purchase sufficient power so as to influence international affairs in such a way as to bring nations into conflict with each other. These Zionists planned to establish a messianic age so that world Zionism with a central government in Palestine could enforce their totalitarian ideology upon the entire world. To achieve their goals, they would control both Zionism and the leaders of communism and fascism, Hitler. They would control both socialism and corporate capitalism through their control of international banking, oil and politics. Their intent, 11, was to bring about a one-world government which they intended to control as they had controlled the former independent nations of the Soviet Union with their agent Lenin after October 1917. It is through the wars generated from behind the scenes that the Zionists intend to establish what George Bush called the New World Order. It could never have been suspected that the concepts of political Zionism would come to control the thrust of liberal as well as so-called fundamental Christianity. It is through this convert Zionist activity that Christians are being deceived into believing that the New World Order to be set up in Jerusalem is the will of God on the earth. What garbage! They intend to use Christian ministries and their Zionist political action committees to get our Senate and Congress, as well as all the presidents, to adopt their objectives as their own.
Zionists believe in the Jewish race, Khazars, rather than the Jewish religion. A far wiser generation than ours rejected the idea of abandoning American sovereignty to a
Zionist world government. In spite of all the propaganda to the contrary over the past 50 years, there was never any intention on Hitler's part to attack and occupy the United States or make us a part of his Third Reich. Hitler did not want war with the United States, and our country was under no threat, militarily or economically, from even a Nazi-conquered Europe. The word Holocaust is not a German word at all, it is Zionist Yiddish, and in Yiddish it means a burnt sacrifice to a god. It is puzzling as to why what happened to the Jews in Hitler's Germany should be called a burned sacrifice to a god, knowing that there was no such intent on the part of Hitler to sacrifice these Jewish people to Almighty God. The Zionist Jews cooperated with Hitler's top people to deliberately annihilate the Orthodox Jews of Poland and Germany. The sacrifice of these Orthodox religious Jews by the Zionist Karzers Jews was in literal fact a holocaust, a burnt sacrifice or offering to their God, whoever that might be. My God does not require such harebrained stuff, does yours? The European poor and uneducated Orthodox Jews were betrayed into Hitler's concentration camps by these Zionist Khazar, that call themselves Jews but are not. These Zionist Khazar are now going back to Palestine after 1,000 years, that are actually the ones who engineered what has become to be known as the Holocaust? The current high-ranking Israeli official, Rudolf Kessner, as being a collaborator with the Nazis, and says that Zionist Kessner was directly responsible for the slaughter of 1 million Hungarian Orthodox Jews. Hitler's Great Holocaust, to the extent that Jews were tortured, starved and murdered, was actually the elimination of the Orthodox Jews by the Zionist Khazar, which are not Jew. The Holocaust was just another Zionist operation. America's involvement in World War II had little to do with any threat against America, or any ego trip by Hitler and his National Socialists, who needed to expand their agricultural land and economic base in order to sustain their failing socialist system. It had to do with providing the Zionists with land in Palestine, from which the eventual New World Order would be directed. The Zionists needed a Holocaust in order to finally get the world to justify giving them a national identity in Palestine from which to bring about their program of the New World Order. The majority of the Jews who died in Hitler's camps did so after being betrayed by the Zionist Karzers Jews, which are not Jews in the United States Department of State. Roosevelt and Churchill knew what was going on. The next thing on the Zionist world agenda was the establishment of the United Nations, which would then, as its first official act, declare that Palestine would belong to the Zionist Jews who wanted to migrate there. The Zionists did not care if it cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of Jews to bring it about. To quote a popular Zionist leader, Rabbi Israel Miller, "I know that I don't have to say this, but in bringing everybody under the Zionist banner, we never forget that our goals are the safety and security of Israel foremost. Our goal will be realized in the Yiddishkeit, in a Jewish life being lived in every place in the word. Our goals will have to be realized, not merely by what we impel others to 12. Do. And here in this country it means frequently working through the President's Conference, or it might be in unison with other groups that feel as we do. But that too is part of what we think Zionism means and what our challenge is. How do you like the idea of bringing everybody under the Zionist banner? Did you know that this is the goal of every Zionist from Henry Kissinger on down? How do you like the idea of a Jewish lifestyle in every place in the world, or being impelled by them to do what they want?